I give so many code examples that I want to do the video too. Let's see how much disk space we have to work with here. And then I know they have these PCs set up kind of weird. 70 gigs, that should be enough. Okay. Okay, so it says it's recording. I get tired of this thing popping up, so it said, was this helpful? And I clicked no, hoping it would go away, but it didn't. So let's go ahead and get started. So quick history. Well, let me get a kind of a sense of the room. How many people have done Python, or not Python program, any sort of programming? Either you took COP2030, any like a JavaScript class at your high school. So for the most part, most people, okay. I would suggest that for most people is that you have a background. I think officially they don't have a prereq for the course, but I would still suggest having some programming experience. That being said, Python's not the most difficult language. You could probably get through it, but you saw those hands go up. For the most part, you're going to be in a classroom filled with people who at least have some programming experience, so you're going to be working a little bit harder than everybody else. Okay. One thing I did notice is that this course used to have very few people in it, and it was like pulling teeth to try to get people to enroll. And all of a sudden this semester, it's like a full room of people. Did something change? Did they put this on like the guided pathway or? Okay, that's what happened. Perfect. We had to force people. Now this is actually, I remember last time I taught this course, it was like barely any people in the room, and it was super frustrating because how many people know something about Python? You've heard of it before. You know a couple of things before. So what's its reputation? Just what did you hear about it? What's that?
Being like easy.
Easy, yeah. So that's definitely, it tends to be easier than other languages. What else do people? Yeah.
It's used a lot for scripting as well.
Perfect. Yeah. So if you want to do scripting, so can you think of an example of something you might do for?
Well, I'm doing network automation, so.
Perfect. Yeah. So that's great. And that's actually one of the things I wanted to bring up is how many people have taken classes with Professor Stroth before, like the networking classes? Is that who? And has he brought that up at some point? That a lot of these companies, Cisco especially, anytime you do any sort of automation, I shouldn't say anytime, but a lot of these companies are moving toward being able to automate things, and a lot of times that automation is going to be in Python. For the most part, what I've seen is that Cisco's pretty much adopted Python. I don't know if they have other scripting language, but that seems to be what I've seen. So that's really good. What about anybody do gaming stuff? So you can do some Python scripting for gaming. It's usually not the main preference, but you can do it. If you were to list like the top 5 languages, it'd probably be like number 5. Definitely wouldn't be number 1. But you can do some gaming stuff with Python. Maybe more toward like 2D games or like. Yeah. I read that they just released a new version of Blender that's not as bad.
Yes.
Is it still as bad?
Well, for game engines, I mean, I've never tried it actually, but
Yeah.
it's just your game engines is good.
Yeah. I think what do most people use for hobbyists and amateur stuff, like Unity still?
Yeah.
Yeah. In Unity, I think Unity relies a lot on C# and JavaScript. Now, I do think they have a Python-like language in there. I don't think very many people use it. Did they drop support, or is it still supported?
I think they still have their own language thing in there.
Yeah. I don't know. I've never heard of people really using it. What do most people end up using? JavaScript and C#? Yeah. C# to me, it makes more sense for that sort of thing anyway. How many people in here are interested in any sort of data mining or like machine learning AI fields? Python's used a lot with that. So let's explore a little bit. Well, we'll keep on talking about different topics. Anybody in here want to be like a system administrator, like for like say Unix or Linux, any type of that stuff? That's used a lot. That's actually where I first learned it. At the time when I learned it, it was probably like around like 2000, and the only people that were using it were system administrators. And so all these cool things that you can do with it now, at the time I was working, it was a little bit after 2000, maybe closer to like 2005. Because at the time I remember I was working as a system administrator. And that's where I was hearing all these people using Python to automate their common tasks. And that's kind of where I first learned it. So it's got a lot of uses. Let's quickly go over its history. So he's the creator, but let's talk about the language. It's gonna be like a history or something. Wow, it's got its own full Wikipedia article. Must be kind of a big deal. Okay, so this guy, I still to this day I don't know how to pronounce his name. It's Guido Van Rossum. Does that sound right? We'll just call him Guido, I guess. He's a mathematician, and he was working with another language, I think it was called like ABC. And he was working at a company at the time, and he just needed to throw a language together relatively quickly. It didn't need to be super, super complete, and it wasn't like some of these other languages that are designed for months and years on end. He just needed a quick scripting language. And that's actually where this all came about, was he just needed a quick scripting language. And I think he borrowed a lot of principles from other programming languages. For a very long time, so Python got popular around version 2. And it added a lot of features, and just this is kind of the time that it exploded in popularity, was probably around version 2. And you can see that they released version 3 in 2008. Now, one of the things that they did is version 3 was actually not backwards compatible with version 2, which is rare in programming languages. Most programming languages, like if I were to take a Java program from 25 years ago when it was first created in the mid-90s, it would probably run on a modern version of Java today. They've been really, 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 really good about backwards compatibility. Same thing with a lot of C programs. I could probably take a C program from 20 years ago and run it on a compiler today with all the correct compiler flags and all that, but still, I could still find a way to run it. Python 3, they just flat out said, okay, we made a lot of mistakes in Python 2. We're going to fix those mistakes. We're going to make a version that's not backwards compatible. And so you can see that it was released in 2008. It's really not until the past 2 or 3 years that Python 3 became kind of the standard. People were very, very hesitant about leaving version 2 because they knew it, and all their libraries and all the different things that they were using were all Python 2. And it's like this whole ecosystem gathered around Python version 2. And then finally, they just had to say, I think it's January 1st, 2020 or something, we're just not going to support Python 2 anymore. And so that really forced everyone to start moving to Python 3. The only reason I bring this up is because you're going to see a lot of different resources on the internet, and some of those resources might be a little bit older. Sometimes you might look at a piece of code and try to run the code, and it does not run for you. Keep this in mind that it could be version 2. I don't like to get into the main details of this sort of stuff just yet, but keep in mind, historically, that's what happened, is that there was a version 2, and people hung on to version 2 for a really long time, and then it's not until maybe in the past 2 or 3 years that version 3 has kind of become the mainstream and the norm. And to this day, if you install a Linux distribution, because Python version 2 is so popular, you'll still get, by default, most Linux distributions actually still include an old backwards compatibility layer, so you can run old Python 2 scripts. So that gets into the details a little bit. But let's talk about this guy right here. When I first started Python, it was not actually that popular of a language. It was just kind of this language that mostly system administrators use to script common tasks. Things like setting up new users, cleaning up log files, rotating log files, getting all the IP addresses and uptimes and that sort of stuff from your servers. Basic stuff that I could go to 30 different servers, or I could write a script and have that script go out and do that for 30 different servers. Bless you. Does anybody, so if we go to, now they have these different indexes of the most popular programming languages. There's probably 30 or 40 of them. There used to be one main index. Now everyone's coming up with their own criteria. But for the most part, Python's almost always going to be in the top 5. So Stack Overflow does their own. There's a company called like Tyobe, I guess that's how you pronounce. They were kind of the first. But no matter what, Python's always going to be, unless they're using some really weird criteria, Python is almost across the board always going to be in the top 5. And you can see even from a year ago, it went from number 4 to number 3. So it's actually gaining in popularity rather than some of these other languages. Like you can see VB.NET is going down. PHP. Kind of makes me sad. That was the first kind of scripting language I learned for the web, PHP. And they made a lot of bad decisions when they made. Has anybody ever done any PHP coding? Yeah, it's kind of falling away.
It makes no sense.
It doesn't make sense anymore. Yeah. So if we were to teach this same class 10 years ago, we would probably taught it in PHP, but we'll get into that later. But Python, because it's such a, it's kind of like they call it the kind of, it's very applicable to many different areas of programming, including the web. That's why it's kind of replaced PHP a lot. But anyway, so it's a very popular language, but 10 years ago it really wasn't that popular of a language. Does anybody know what company really launched Python? So Python's an open source project. It doesn't really have a company, but there's one company that uses a bunch of it. Okay, so a little bit more history. We'll get to programming at one point. It's good to know this history because once you're writing code, it's like you get all this kind of backlog to it. So Google, when they first launched, they were very pragmatic. They were very practical about how they were going to write software. They said, okay, anything that we can write in Python, we're going to write in Python. If that thing becomes whatever it is, an algorithm, whatever it is, if that piece of software, if it needs too much performance or it kind of outgrows Python, then we'll move to Java. If that software gets too large for Java, we'll write it in C and C++. And so that was their motto for a very long time. They've gone away from this, but this was like the early days of like when there was like, you know, Google of like 20 employees type Google. And they stuck to this for a while. They've had so many acquisitions, they don't stick to it anymore in JavaScript, and they started inventing their own languages. Like they have one called Dart and Go, but for a long time this was true. One of the people that they hired, they said, okay, if we're writing a lot of Python code, we've got a lot of money, we're Google, we can buy anybody. They went ahead and hired this guy, the actual creator of the language. And he was really, really influential at Google, but I think a lot of people saw that and they said, hey, here's this language that Google's using just everywhere. They've hired the creator of the language. They're putting a lot back into the language. Let's kind of give this a second thought. Let's kind of look at this seriously. And that's basically what happened is, I don't want to say it's all on Google, but I would say Google really helped kind of boost. There's a big open source community. There's a lot of other companies, but to me this was, for a lot of people, they said, hey, if this big corporate tech company is using Python, it must be not just like some random open source project anymore. This must be something that we can take seriously. Now you can see here, he moved to Dropbox, and where he's also very influential at Dropbox as well. Google, for the most part, when they release software these days, they tend to mostly release, let me think how to say this. So let's say, for example, there's a very, very popular AI library called TensorFlow. Has anybody heard of this before? A huge amount of research, AI research. If you're doing the AI research, you're probably using TensorFlow. Like maybe 70 or 80%, that's kind of a guess. But the bulk of AI research, people implement it in TensorFlow. There's other libraries now, like there's one called PyTorch and stuff that a lot of people like, but TensorFlow is written in Python. Can't remember the name of it. TensorFlow. Oh, another that they just released is called dopamine. It's called it's for this area of AI called reinforcement learning. You might have seen reinforcement learning and not realized what that was. Has anybody seen those videos out on the internet of like a robot trying to flip a like a pancake or a hamburger? Has anybody seen those? That's reinforcement learning. Reinforcement learning is when you have AI that just tries random stuff over and over and over and over again, and then they learn just like a child would. You know how like a little kid, you might give them some blocks, and then you give them, you know, you got to try to put the blocks together somehow. That's sort of what it is, reinforcement learning. But they released a library that's in Python. What else? Is anybody in here interested in like the computer security aspect, like cybersecurity and all that?
It's funny how they call it dope. I got where they were coming from with that.
Yeah, they're always very clever with their naming. So if you want to craft custom TCP/IP packets, actually, this is a better description. It's a packet manipulation tool. So if you're ever writing like network tools, mostly usually to do with cybersecurity, because if you're creating custom packets, you're probably doing something out of the norm. They've got a library for that. If you want to create just like fun 2D games, like I said, it's not used as much, but it's kind of fun if you just want to get into the basics of 2D games, just right, kind of like NES level games, I guess you'd say, or you know, kind of that era. You can do that. There's one other one I was going to bring up. Oh, out of curiosity, is anybody a biology major in here? That surprised me. Okay. They actually have a very useful library if you're doing DNA sequencing and you want to do like blast searches and do sequence alignment and all that sort of stuff. You can actually do that in Python too. Pretty cool. So you can see this is not just a language anymore just for system administrators. The reason I go through this whole thing is I don't want anybody in here to think that you're getting like this. So okay, I teach COP2030. I think it's a very important fundamentals class. For those that took it, when you left that class, did you get the feeling a little bit that you knew how to write software, but maybe not something that somebody could use? Did you get that general sense? This Python class, it's going to be the opposite of that. At the end of the class, hopefully you're going to write something useful that you could show somebody and be proud of. You know what I mean? Not to say that the stuff in COP2000, it's a fundamentals class. You're not going to show somebody, look, I learned if statements. You know what I mean? Like at the end of the day, people want to see software that you produced. And so hopefully this class, by the end, you'll actually have produced something useful. Whether it's, you know, doing, isn't probably applicable to most people. But let's say, for example, you wanted to do this, create some custom TCP/IP packets and maybe see if you can make your own little port scanner, which you could do with this library. You could make a very, very simple port scanner. Okay? So things like that at the end of the class that you can actually say, hey, look at this cool thing I made. Okay. I did a lot of talking. Who wants to write some code? Any questions before we get started? Okay, let's just go ahead and write some code. Now, in the past, where am I going? Okay, so go to Blackboard and go to resources. Now, in the past, I would usually, I misspelled the word Jupyter. They have these cool notebooks. They're called GPU. They used to be called IPython notebooks, but they changed the name to Jupyter. It's Julia, Python, and R, I think, something like that. But they have these cool little notebooks. We're not going to use them very much in here, but they're used in the scientific community a lot. They're really, really useful. I don't want to waste any more time. When I used to have everyone in here download Python, install it on your computer, and go through that whole process. Now, that's an important thing that you can go out and do on your own. Does anybody in here know Linux or have a Mac or anything like that? A little bit. So it's pretty standard that you're going to have Python already installed on those systems. So you can learn the command line stuff. So That's great. A lot of people I noticed would get stuck on just installing the software. And this is not a class on how to install software. So I've gotten a little bit more lenient. What I started using is there's this very cool website. It's called Repple. You can see up here we're using Python version 3. How many people have used this site before? Show of hands. It's pretty cool. It's actually very clever about how they did it. But what you can actually do is write Python code in here. This is really nice because you don't have to install an IDE and your Python interpreter and libraries and like, because usually, literally this is how it used to be. You'd have to install a distribution like Conda, which would take a very long time. Some people had slow internet connections, and then most people wanted to use an IDE like PyCharm, and then you'd have to know how to install packages, and it just became like a 2 or 3 class process for some people. And then what happens? Well, I've installed it on that one computer. Now I can only write Python code on that one computer. The cool thing about this is a website. You can use this anywhere. It's free. The other nice thing is that any code, if you sign up, I'm not going to make it a requirement to sign up, but most people generally do, because if you sign up, it's free. For now, who knows? Maybe one day they'll change that. But for now, for the past couple of years, I've been using it. It's been free. Any code that you've written, it saves for you. The thing I noticed is that people had a very difficult time transferring their files over, and they would get version mix-ups. Like they would go home, work on the code for a little bit, think that they put the code on their flash drive, get back to class, it was the wrong version. You know what I mean? Has anybody ever run into that in like your C programming class? The nice thing about this is that this is all stored on the cloud. So no matter where you go, you have all your code available. So you don't have to worry about doing it right now, but it's a pretty useful thing for most people, I think, to sign up, and then you can just get to your code from anywhere. Okay, so this is what we're going to use. Hopefully this is large enough for everyone. And for anybody who hasn't had me before, the way I teach is that I write some code, and then you write some code, and we kind of go back and forth on that. Okay, so you're basically going to be copying what I type and I explain, and then every once in a while I'll say, try this on your own, and I'll give you a couple minutes, and then I'll give you the answer. Okay? So what's the most famous first program in all of computer science? Hello World. So let's start off with the Hello World. So we print Hello World and run it. No semicolon. You'll enjoy Python. One of the things about Python is that they stress readability, and so you're not going to see things like curly braces and semicolons. There's the downside, which we'll get to later, is that you have to write your code in a very specific way, but by doing that, it makes the code more readable. This is like one of those giant debates within the community. So, but yes, no semicolon. Okay. So this thing right here is called a function. How many people, show of hands, know what a function is? Okay, so this should be familiar for most people. The idea of a function is it's just a reusable piece of code. Some programmer at some point wrote a function called print, and now that means that we can use it. And what this print function does is it actually prints whatever you put here to the screen. So this thing right here is called a string. It's a string of individual characters. Now, I'm going to assume that a lot of people in here came from COP2030, and so anytime there's like a difference between them, like the semicolon, I should have brought that up. Anytime there's a difference between the two, I'll try to note that somewhere. So strings in C++, how might you have written the same string? What do you know is different? Double quotes, yeah. And so in Python and in a few languages like JavaScript, you can either use single or double as long as you're consistent. So I could do this. I could change it to this. And it still works just as well. The thing obviously I couldn't do something like that. That's not going to work. I don't know if there's a particular preference. Usually I end up using what's more convenient. A lot of times just not having to hit the shift key is more convenient. But on your assignments, I would never take off points of using single or double. I don't think there's a huge amount of consensus in the community about which is better. Okay, so let's do this. So let's run it. And your very first assignment, to make sure that everyone actually was able to get to the Repple website, run the hello world and all that, what I want is a screenshot. Normally you're going to actually turn in the source code for your assignments, but because I want to know that you actually got to the website, wrote the code, and did it, and actually ran it, let's go ahead and do a screenshot. So for anybody who hasn't done a screenshot, I'm going to walk you through it. So there's a tool called the Snipping Tool, which apparently they're getting rid of.
On Windows 10, you can do Windows Shift S.
Oh, hold on. Let's do that. I want to learn that one. Okay, what is it?
Windows Shift S.
And then it just brings it right up. Oh, that's cool. Okay. Let's do that. So if you know how to use the Snipping Tool, great, but I like this keyboard shortcut better. So Windows Shift S all at the same time. And then that'll bring up this screen.
Yeah, it saves to clipboard, and then you just click the notification.
Okay.
Edit and save.
So let's do this. We'll do a full screen.
Yeah, you just click that.
Perfect. Okay. And then go ahead and click this.
Because otherwise it's only saved in your clipboard for copying
Okay.
and pasting.
Perfect. Okay, let me go through that process one more time for anybody who missed it. Okay, so you do Windows key, Shift, and S. That'll bring up this program. Go ahead and click the button for the full screen. So I just took a screenshot. Now we have a little notification here. Go ahead and click that notification. And then click Save at the top right. And then I'm just going to leave it in pictures. That's fine. So this is important. This isn't a class about screenshots, but I want to make sure everyone gets this. So that's what I'm going over. So one more time, I did Windows key, Shift S. I did a full screen snip. It brought this up. I clicked it. Clicked Save. Just took the default name. That's fine. Clicked OK. And then now go over to Blackboard under Assignments. And then go to assignment number 1. It's just going to always have my thumb down. I swear I click Don't Show Again, and it just keeps on coming back. Okay, and then under Attached Files, go to Browse My Computer. And then it defaulted to Pictures, so find Pictures over here. And yeah, so mine says annotation something. You might have other screenshots, by the way. Don't get confused, because I make other classes do screenshots. Make sure, so it says annotation and then date. So make sure it says 2019-09-09. And then click Submit. Now normally I'm just going to have you give me your source code. Yeah.
Yeah, my thing's not saved. Like I press it and the notification doesn't pop up.
Oh, okay. The other thing that you can do, yeah, there's another tool. If even Snipping Tool won't open. Okay, go old school. If you there's a button on your keyboard, print screen. It's on the top right, on the top row of keys. So it'll say F9, F10, F11, F12, print screen. You see it? Go ahead and press that. And it puts it on the clipboard. Now if you go to Microsoft Word, you should be able to paste it in as a Word document and then just turn that in. Turn your Word document in. Did that work for you? Yeah.
Print screen, you can also do Windows function print screen. It'll save the screenshot to the picture
Oh, so just this one step, that's quicker. What is it again?
Windows function print screen.
Yeah, these keyboards have a function key. I think you need to hit function to print screen on them.
Oh, mine's different. Mine just has a. If anybody needs help, just hang out after class. It'll take 2 minutes, okay? So if anybody wasn't able to get that, just hang out and I'll help you. Okay, so get that out of the way. That's just to make sure. I just have to do that just essentially because what I had people. So usually the first assignment isn't due like a week and a half after class. And what I noticed is that I would have people for the first 2 weeks of class not actually writing code. Couldn't even do a hello world. And I wouldn't discover it until 2 weeks in the class. If you can't do a hello world 2 weeks in the class, it's too late. So that's why I started to make everyone do this now. Okay, so let's introduce a couple more things before we go for today. So now what we can do here is we have our string. We can do that, but we can also do some basic arithmetic. So just like any other programming language, we can do 1 plus 1. Now this is a little bit of a tough subject. It's like here we are day 1. And it turns out printing is a lot more complicated than you'd realize. So in like C++, if I wanted to do something like, so don't write this, this isn't Python code. If I wanted to say, I could do something like that. With Python, if I tried to do the equivalent, it's going to complain. Okay, this gets a little bit complicated because these are numbers, and we just try to mix numbers with strings. This is day 1. I don't want to get too complicated into it. But what I will let you know is that in the new versions of Python, there's like 10 different ways to do this. There's something called an F string. I'm really finding myself liking the F string. The reason they call it an F string is literally you just take this, put an F in front of it, and then any code you write in curly braces would be Python code. So if I did 1 plus 1, I think this should work. Does that make sense? So we're going to lean toward these. In the past, I've used the many other different formatting methods, and people just got really confused. To me, this is the simplest. So anything that you want to be a string, you just write as normal. But anything that you want it to be Python code, in this case 1 plus 1, you just wrap with curly braces. And I guess we can. I want to get out of the habit of deleting code. So we'll just have these 3 lines right here. Yeah.
What's the F doing here?
It's basically a special character, and that's kind of what Python does. Is they'll do like these special one-off things, like I think it probably is short for format. So you're saying that this is like a formatted string, not just a regular string.
Okay. Because I've used something like this. There's like an online role-playing game called Roll20, and they have a code that looks a lot like that, where you kind of write a certain type of code, and then you have like in braces, like a dice calculation sometimes, and it just reminds
Oh, yeah, this is actually a very common thing to do. And other languages have something similar, like JavaScript, and so it could be that game is in JavaScript. Is it like a web-based game?
I'm pretty sure it's in JavaScript.
Yeah, and so what they'll do is that these special characters, they'll assume anything in between here is code, or something special to that game or special to that system. So it's not just this is kind of a common thing, and we don't use it in COP2030. There's other ways to do these sorts of things, but this is more common in scripting languages.
Yeah, I'm used to formatted strings looking a little more messy.
Like a printf.
Yeah, printf string.
Yeah.
C.
Which you can still do that in this. We're just going to avoid them because I think for most people it tends to be a little bit more confusing than it needs to be.
Like on lead, isn't it?
What's that? Yeah.
Stuff like that.
Yeah. This class is till 12:15, right? Okay. So let's just do a couple more things, and then we'll go. So everyone still remembers variables, right? The idea of a variable is that it holds a variable, or so it holds a variable holds a value of some sort. So we'll keep it very simple for now. We'll say that we've got some thing. Let's do this. We'll say age. Say the person's 87 years old. And then print age. You see 87. Normally what I do is for each example, I open up a new tab and do each one of these. But since we're doing such simple examples, we can just stuff everything into one thing today. How are we doing on disk space? Okay. Looks like we're doing okay. So line number 5. If I wanted to do that in C++, what would I have to do? Yeah. So with Python, what we usually do is the first value that it takes, that's the data type it is. So because we assigned 87 to it, so don't type this. It knew that it was an int because the first thing that we assigned to it was a number. And so that's what happens is that the first thing, the first value that it takes, that becomes the type. There's some pros and cons to this. The pro is that you're not always having to manage data types. The con is that sometimes you do really want to know what the data type is, and it can be a little bit difficult. Yeah.
That actually kind of confuses me a little bit because if you do end up declaring a long and an int, how do you not get a type error if you have to use those two together for some reason?
So it's, I think the term is, it's weakly typed. So it's not like other languages where you can't, some languages you can't add an int in a long. This, it's going to understand that. I know, I'm sorry, it's
So it's done
dynamic typing, I think is the term.
It's done like automatically,
Yeah, for the most part.
like a tree compiler sort of thing.
Yeah. So you don't have to worry about typing that. But now let's do this. Let's use that f string that we used before. We can say age is, and because that age is a variable, we can use it inside of our string. Okay, so that's all we're going to do today, but let me just quick review. So you know how to get to the Repple website to write some code. I would suggest signing up so you can have all your code saved and everything. We talked about this print function, and all print does is it prints to the screen. We talked about this right here. This is what's known as a string of characters. That should be familiar to you from your other programming. We could do things like basic arithmetic. Then we introduced this thing called an f string, which tends to be a very convenient way of being able to format strings. So here we said result is, and then we put some stuff, some Python code between some curly braces, and it said, oh, result is 2. It actually executed that. Then we talked about variables. Well, with variables in Python, unlike other languages, we don't have to declare it as an integer or double or whatever ahead of time. It's that the first thing that we assigned to it, in this case, was an integer, so age became an int. And this is actually a pretty common usage of f strings right here, that we use print with another f string, but rather than a 1 + 1, we just put the name of the variable in here. This makes it much more readable. I'll just quickly show you the other alternatives that we had to use that weren't as readable, so don't worry about typing these because we're not going to use them. But before we would say something like age is, and this will fail. because this is a string and this is a number. So what we had to do was then cast it to a string. Hopefully you can see why this is somewhat unreadable versus this. To me, this is considerably more readable. And then finally we had these, I don't even know what the name of these were. I think, yeah, it basically used the same style as like a printf or sprintf. So these were our alternatives. To me, I've pretty much moved over to using these because they're just much more convenient and readable. Okay. So I'm just going to comment these out just to let you know that we're not going to use them. Oh, I guess one last thing. You probably realized this already, but what's the comment symbol in Python? The hash or dollar or not dollar, hash or pound sign. And the nice thing about, even if you didn't know that, what's the nice thing about syntax highlighting? It kind of gave you that cue, right, of the muted text. So, okay, so that's all we're going to do today. No specific homework between now and next class. We'll get into it next class, other than, I guess, getting this uploaded. Maybe between now and next class, just go home and make an account if you decide you do want to make an account. Experiment with print a little bit, but other than that, we'll keep on with this stuff on Wednesday. Okay. Any last minute questions? Raise your hand. Did anybody still need help getting their screenshot posted? Were you able to get help? Is everyone good? Okay. Okay, great. So email me if anything comes up. Otherwise, I'll see everybody on Wednesday, and hopefully we'll learn a lot of Python code this semester. Okay, see you, everybody.